Now, I let's just dive straight into ZywOo, because this is something that I had a lot of thinking about, rewatching him play, trying to figure out what the fuck was going on in this grand final. And I am mentally doing the exercise of, I'm not allowing myself to be lazy and just pinpoint other members of the Vitality team who didn't do what they needed to do and then use that as an excuse. Like I'm not doing any of that. We can talk about them later down the road, and there's things to be said. I think I'm starting to pinpoint what is currently differentiating top level ZywOo and a top level s1mple. I think I'm holding on to something. What ZywOo doesn't have right now, that s1mple always had, is the ability to go against what his team wants to do when his team is fucking up. And this simple sentence encapsulates what I think is the main issue for ZywOo. Because I was watching him at the grand final, and barring over 3 maps, maybe 3 or 4 missed shots or him being a little bit less sharp, I don't actually think he sucked. Like, I don't think he sucked in this game. I was watching him play, but it was more about like the positions he was finding himself in that were most of the times ridiculous, if not completely idiotic for like the setup that's happening in the server. And I'm thinking, how do you end up there? Like, how do you end up in this position that you are now? Obviously, Vitality was just like the Titanic that just hit the iceberg. And you could see that after 6 or 7 rounds, they were already in free fall mode, like full panic, agitated, reactive calls, always behind, no trade, bad aiming. The whole thing was here. The whole salad was a catastrophe. But s1mple would go against the call if he thought individually there's something different that has to happen in order to win. And I feel like ZywOo is probably trying to keep up with the plan that is currently the plan of the team, even if that plan is shit, which in my opinion was a lot of the time in this grand final. A lot of the time, Vitality were completely off the mark in the rotations they needed to do, the way they needed to play the clutches, they were completely off as far as I'm concerned. Why? I mean, why? I can't ask why, but I don't think he's yet capable of breaking through that mold at this very point in time. I think this is what I'm feeling. This is what comes across when I'm watching this grand final.
This is where I actually think people misunderstand that whole discussion we had about Dexter and what it means to be toxic. Because I can tell you, Maniac, I've actually gone, like I did with Alexi B, the micromanaging thing, and I just did what I can do as a journalist. I just went and asked a bunch of his former teammates. Now, unsurprisingly, I don't have the connections, I don't particularly know them, to ask like the Russian ones. I was mainly asking people in like OG and teams like that, obviously, that he's played with, and people who were coaches of his stuff. And by the way, they all say it's nonsense. They say like they actually have no idea what that narrative is. They say either comes out of the Russian teams or it's people misunderstanding basically that he like has his own ideas, just what you've just described there about how the AWP should play, and that since he had like poor English, he just wasn't great at expressing himself essentially, which by the way, you could probably infer means like maybe he raged once or twice. But put it this way, when they tell you privately off the record like this, en masse, like, that's usually where people don't particularly lie, if you know what I mean. Like, in that scenario, their name's never going to be on record with it. And if anything, if someone's actually a dickhead, I can tell you, behind the scenes, that's when they do tell you, because they want someone to know, and they don't want to just be the one who had the burden of knowing this guy was an arsehole. So the reason I bring that up is because one thing I think people have misunderstood the whole time with great players in Counter-Strike is, this is something, by the way, that coaches fucking hate, because I call it superstar theory. They don't want to believe it's real, Maniac. What they believe is all Counter-Strike is a team game. It's like a mixture of like battlefield chess, and you're sort of doing team movements. And you know what? Because here's the problem: the average coach isn't going to have ZywOo or s1mple or Nico or some prime player. What they're going to have is like what Mouse has, like some pretty good players, or like 1 or 2 good players and 1 like good. And because you've got normal players, you're going to use all the traditional orthodox methods that work in Counter-Strike. Like, for example, the things you coach your team on if you have a normal team is like, always trade frag. 2-on-1 means you get the kill eventually. Then you take the CT's defense away. Then you get the bomb down. Then you know, they're going to coach like flow chart Counter-Strike, because that's actually the best way to coach most people and to get them to be more than the sum of their parts by working together. But the problem is this: the superstars, and you notice, Maniac, I never give anyone superstar status till they're really fucking good. Like, I don't even give it to like the Ikindars of the world when they pop off. Like, I need to see it a whole bunch. I need to see it in playoffs. I need to see it in bad games like this. And this is why I actually think an essential component of being a superstar is you are such an outlier to all the normal rules of Counter-Strike, like even team concepts sometimes, that as you're saying, there are moments, and obviously the simples of the world can go too far the other way sometimes, where you have to actually say, I'm sorry, this is fucked up, but I'm the only one who can make this call because I'm the only one who knows what I can do right now. What we're doing isn't working. And if I do what we're going to do, look, you wouldn't say it in these words, we're going to lose this round. So basically, like sort of hold on to your ass, I'm just going to go do something. And you just have to deal with it. And by the way, if we lose, it's going to look really fucking bad and you're all going to call me selfish. But I'll tell you what, we might also win a game that we'll never win otherwise. Because there's a great quote from Michael Jordan back in the day, right? Where the guy who was, a lot of people don't know this, it isn't just that Michael Jordan had an amazing coach called Phil Jackson, who was sort of like spiritual guy and he understood psychology. There also, a detail people don't know is the assistant coach of the Chicago Bulls was a guy who invented the offense that Michael Jordan's team used. And basically, because he invented this offense, it's the same concept, Maniac. It's all about passing and finding the open man and traditional basketball. And that guy hated Michael Jordan and hated Kobe Bryant later because his whole shit was like, bro, I've designed like the best system and you're just breaking the system to do your shot. And so he once said to Michael Jordan when he was leaving the floor after some like scrimmage game, not even like a real game, some scrimmage, he just said something like, hey, Michael, there's no I in team. And Jordan just said, there is in win, and just walked off the court. And the point there, if you get that point, is we're not saying to ZywOo, do it every game. That actually would ruin the team. And it would, by the way, potentially make you a selfish player that gets your numbers, but no one else gets there. You can go too far with it. But I agree with you. That was always the reason I also had a problem putting ZywOo at the s1mple status. Because, mate, if I even start mentioning some games to you, your brain will immediately remember s1mple doing this. Like, remember when he used to play at the end with Zeus and Edward? Bro, he had to just freelance anytime he wanted. Like, I saw rounds where he would entry, he would lurk the next round. He was doing, I mean, the most famous was in the online era. Remember in the online era on Nuke, when he would just essentially play the entire CT side of the map wherever he wanted, because he was just so good. He was like, you know what? If I make the fight them versus me with an AWP every time, we can win all these fights. And it worked. Like, it actually was working, even when that was like a scoffed Navi before they had bit, etc. So I do think that is the area where ZywOo, I've always made this point. The reason why coaches hate my superstar theory is because they spend all their time getting players who think they're superstars, maybe the Ikinders of the world, to not play like that because they're like, bro, if you do that, you aren't good enough to do it. Only like 3 people can do that, basically. But the problem is this. I actually think when you coach the whole team the same way, the mistake is you're going to tell someone like ZywOo, it's good that you don't take proactive action like that. It's good that you never disagree with Apex or the coach. It's good that you always just do what the team says and think of all those slogans, you know, win as a team, lose as a team, you know, it's no one's fault. We all like did this shit. No, in this scenario, this is the weird angle. It's the opposite dynamic, Maniac. ZywOo isn't actually being unselfish by not doing this. He's actually in a fucked up way being selfish. I know it'll sound weird, but what I mean by is this. The unselfish thing to do for real is to look down your line and go, I mean, Messi can't do what I'm about to do. So we're not the same player. We can't all just play by the same rules at all times of every map. Apex can't even know what I'm going to do right now. He's not the same player as me. In fact, no one can. So actually, sometimes to be unselfish, I have to know I am the best player on this team. And sometimes in a game like that final, by the way, we're not going to win anyway. So the only chance we've got pretty much is you've got to let me freelance a little bit. You know, like I've got to go crazy because I'm with you. I've always thought that's actually why s1mple even. I've always said this, Maniac. I never thought s1mple actually choked those like major finals he lost. I used to think he did the opposite. He tried to do too much. He would just try and break it constantly. He had the opposite issue, you know. But this is why I'm framing it very carefully against s1mple's critics. I'm not trying to make it sound like he perfected it and you can just do what he did. I think ZywOo's problem is he's the most unselfish superstar ever.
I'll go one step further in that whole analysis because there's a couple things. The first one is I know from within, from my contact in there, that he is enticed by the Vitality staff and the coach and the leader and all to do more of that, like to be more selfish. To be that's a fact.
I know they mentioned it many times in interviews.
No, exactly. It is actually like they are trying to get him to do that more, right? So I think it's like from an organizational standpoint, they're aware that it's something that is more necessary at least. But where the indictment comes from, as far as I'm concerned, is that when you see Vitality and particularly ZywOo having a good game, he does some of that selfish, whatever the fuck was that type plays. He does that.
Sure.
He done it against FaZe. He done it against Astralis, where he basically double entries and then disregards the rules, go for the third one, then plays a clutch like a madman. He can do it. Like he can break from what is supposed to be textbook pure CS in order to assert his dominance and destroy a round. He can do it. What I'm feeling right now is that he might not be mentally strong enough to withstand his team crumbling next to him. I think this is where the problem is. And I'm not saying it's going to be like that his whole career. I think it's something that you can outgrow. It's something that you can work on if you're aware. But this is where I think there was always a core difference between s1mple and ZywOo. So yeah, s1mple used to rage, but I don't think s1mple felt overwhelmed by how bad people next to him were at any point. If anything, that was maybe just a given for him because of who he played with in his upbringing as well. And his flip side of Hellraiser.
No, if people don't know, I'll even tell you, Maniac. That's one thing that was very misunderstood about s1mple. When he would rage in the game or afterwards make a stupid comment in an interview, that was actually his way of putting it on the shelf and forgetting about it. He never did internally say those people should be kicked, by the way. Like, he would just sort of go, okay, they fucked up now, but I forgive them, on to the next game. So I think you've got something there, yeah.
Exactly. So I think this is where, like, this is one of the most unspoken truth about ZywOo, because on a pure Counter-Strike level, I will never bulge from the fact that I do think he will be the greatest of all time from a pure Counter-Strike level. And I'm just talking about the mouse and the keyboard and what's happening in the server. I'm not going to move from that position quite yet. But I do think in terms of mentality and resilience, I think he isn't on a s1mple level quite yet. It's just the way I see it. I see him being more impacted by the tragedy that's happening around him. And this is where, for now, it's just a Pandora box we're not opening. But again, the whole team in the grand final crumbled and there's multiple angles to attack it. But I will say, I have no defense for what I have seen from ZywOo, because with that type of level should come attached the fact that you can deal with whatever is around you and you will still put your best foot forward. And I just don't think he's there quite yet. That's the one area where I believe there is a need for improvement, and I am not exactly sure how to go about that. It's probably going to take some time, some mental coaching, psychologist, whatever the hell is needed, introspection, whatever you need to do. But I do think he has to be way more equipped to deal with the chaos. And I mean chaos in a negative way. I'm not talking about excitement and high comms and having fun. No, I'm talking about chaos as in nobody is playing the game the way it's supposed to be. So every communication is wrong. So every decision is wrong. So every round goes to shit. I'm talking about that chaos in which s1mple, because we always use s1mple as a sort of a comparison point here, where he could still thrive. I don't want ZywOo to get rid of all of the other attributes he's got. I don't want even him to become s1mple. Not at all. I just think in this one area, works need to be done, because this might also be one of the reasons why he hasn't been able to put that kind of performance in a Cologne grand final or a Katowice, whatever, because I still think he is too impacted by the catastrophe that is surrounding him in these moments. So it's a double indictment. It's on him and it's on the Vitality team. I'm not saying it's all up to them. It's definitely not only up to him, because fuck, if ZywOo tomorrow was in FaZe Clan, he would probably win every single tournament for the rest of Counter-Strike.
By the way, I would even say this. Here's one thing people don't realize. He doesn't have to carry every game, like I said, and set the record. Like, isn't he allowed to carry the fucking quarters and the semi, and then someone else carry the final, and then he gets to win? Like, normal player. Even s1mple's done that before. He's had the odd final, he didn't just mega carry. So I do think that part's unfair. Like, that's why, to me, it was never like ZywOo sucked, that's why they lost. Like, if anything, ZywOo having his problems is just more magnified because of the stats race he was on. But there's so much in the other team. I've got a couple of angles for you here. Right, this is where I actually feel like, this will sound counterintuitive, but I actually feel like winning those first two blasts right out the gate with those new lineups actually might have fucked Vitality, because I think it gave them a really unrealistic set of expectations of who they are as a team. Because if you actually look at this squad, here's one of those times where you make a prediction and the actual outcome isn't what you predicted, but the reasoning you gave was good. So when I did those shows that I do on this Last Free Nation Network, like Hot Take Point Made with Kassad and Maui, obviously the whole interesting thing about that show, it's actually why I invented the format, is you're not trying to make the hot take an actual garbage take. You're trying to make it so it's like plausible, but then you sort of like extending the trajectory as far as you can. So I'll give you an example. Like when they signed Wonderful to Na'Vi, it wasn't like I just said they'll be better. I was like, they'll win one of the first two events. I'm trying to make it like, what would the best case scenario be? Right? I actually had a bunch of takes when they signed each of these players in order. Flames, then fucking Mezzi. My takes were, I actually don't know if this Vitality will be the best team, because to me, what people are ignoring here is two things. One, what made you just win that last major and Rio and have that little era at the end of CSGO where you looked really strong? Remember, they could have won that blast right afterwards as well. They were like the top team in the world. They were really strong. Was you had a totally different core of players. You had Megiskin Dupree. You had fucking Zonic as your coach, right? You don't have any of these things in the new Vitality. So already it's a different team. You can't rely on anything you had from back then. Like Apex, Spinks and ZywOo, that's sort of a core, but is it really? You know what I mean? Like you look at the roles they're playing. I don't know too much about that. Like, so then the other factor as well is the two players you brought in, Mezzi and Flames. Right, guys, it's not like anyone before they joined Vitality was like, they must be in Vitality. These two players are so insanely good that if they miss you, like, no, remember, these are players for real that were in teams like OG and fucking the Bad Fnatic. Like, these were players, like, look, they were the best players in their teams. But even then, no one was like, this guy's like actually a top 5 player in the world, but he just needs to be on like Vitality or FaZe. No one ever said that. The difference is, you know this, everyone did call for Frozen to be in FaZe for years and years. Everyone did want certain players to get that step up. Actually, Spinks is a better example. Spinks did look in Ensign. He should be in a team like this. Yeah. So my problem here is I do think people have taken those two players, Mezzi and Flames, and because initially it went so well with them, and then that totally new Vitality, which remember, doesn't even have Zonic anymore. It's got X-Stars back again from fucking years before. I think people have ignored how many variables have changed. So to me, I look at Vitality now, especially this year when they haven't got any wins. I look at them as a very different team. Like, look, you still have ZywOo, so on paper you can be the best team. I think Apex is still pretty good. Your map pool's pretty strong even in the current meta. Like, there's plenty of reasons you could be number one, but you're not a lock anymore. And I think, unfortunately, I do feel like Vitality fans and ZywOo fans, Maniac, think they should win every tournament, and that like those first blasts are what like a normal Vitality run looks like, you know.
I know. And I think it is fair. It was.
Because it's pretty competitive CS right now, mate. There's a lot of fucking good teams at the top.
I don't think it was counterintuitive, but it was, after all, surprising that they won all of these trophies straight when Mezzi joined. It wasn't supposed to be like that. It was supposed to be a downgrade from Magisk, and they were supposed to be some waves, and then eventually, and then everything clicked, and that just worked out. So the names you mentioned, we can just take them one at a time. Mezzi obviously still struggles to have a floor high enough that he isn't a liability, and that is a reality. Which is, you look at the numbers of the grand final, you don't need to have like a deep analysis of what happened. Like, there's just the pure output is way too low, and he's got maps, and I think it still is map dependent, where he feels a bit more comfortable, and he's got clutching abilities, I would say. Like,
he's got that, for that, yeah.
The 1v2 against Stralis on Inferno is one that literally probably puts Vitality in the W situation, even though ZywOo had 1 million kills. So every now and then he's got like something that appears, something that happens that makes you think, oh, hold on a second, like he's got more in the tank. But the problem is, consistently, I think the floor is too low, and it becomes a liability.
Sure.
Again, if I'm going to do an actual anchor versus anchor analysis of the grand final, I'm telling you, on one hand is Jimpal, the other one is Mezzi. Need I go any further? Like, it's just the comparison and differential is too strong. So the floor is too low for Mezzi, and now he's been in that team for a little while. So I think we're probably reaching the point where it's time to think of other solutions. I mean, if you what you want to do is win. And I personally think when you have ZywOo in your team, all you want to do is win. Sure. Like, nothing else should be acceptable. So if you're Vitality, I think it's time to question. I mean, I put Jimpat in Vitality in a lot of tweets out there. I know he's not going to leave Miles. I think he's very happy in Miles right now. But can you imagine what kind of team it would be if he was in that roster? Anywho, that's for Mezzi. For Flames, I do think he is more inconsistent than what meets the eye, because whenever he's got a good team, or whenever he's got a good game, and this is usually the syndrome where we get, like, from a perception biases, we get so impressed when he's got a good map. Like, everybody remembers good Flames map, like the Vertigo in Copenhagen where he goes crazy, the Major, the first map of the grand final, crazy at all. Like, you remember these maps, like they stick with you, and you're like, oh shit, like, yeah, Flames, yeah, he's got a hard carry factor, like his entries are incredible. The truth is, it's not that consistent. And none of that output came through in the grand final. Like, the aim was shaky. He wasn't sharp at all. The entries didn't come through. So you already have two players that are problematic. And now the last angle, which to me might be the most hurtful one. I'm starting to see a pattern in Spinks missing the mark in the last games of these LAN events as well. It's starting to happen. For someone that is supposed to be the 5th best player in the world last year.
Yeah.
The 5th best player. Basically the electronic to the s1mple. Like, it's exactly who he was supposed to be in 2023. If you look at the series he's had in the losing moments of all of these events, the Pro League one, the one in Copenhagen at the Major, the one in Katowice, in none of these games is he really delivering like the 5th best player in the world. And it's annoying because throughout the rest of the tournament, I really think he's starting to get like a good consistency. His numbers are great. If you just like look top level, he's got 1.20 rating, something last 2 months, which is very, very good. It's super honorable. Like his output is there. But damn, like when you're gonna have a player like that goes just decent and regular in a series at the end, like bro, how is Vitality supposed to win? Like the factors are just stacking up. The limiting factors are stacking up to the point where it becomes just disbalanced. And that, I think all of that came through. If anything, I was going to mention out there, I think Spinks was probably one of the few bright lights of the grand final. Like he had a few moments. I don't think he's the one that I would indict immediately in the grand final here, although obviously way below his numbers throughout the group stage, but he didn't disappear. But yeah, it was like, fucking hell. And that's not even that's not even talking about Apex's frustration. And do you remember how Vitality used to look like when they brought in the Danes the first time around, when it was Magisk and Dupree the first time? It was very discombobulated. Like it took them a long time to figure out the Counter-Strike they wanted to play. Apex was very agitated, very frustrated. The calls were very, how will I say, rushed. I felt like the calls were rushed. They were playing under pressure. I saw this Vitality again in Pro League. Like making rush decisions, being all frantic and agitated. It's like, holy hell, how are you supposed to win a grand final when all of this is coming together? This is just too much. And definitely ZywOo wasn't able to outweigh all of the issues that I just mentioned.
That's one of the reasons I also referenced that, like, to me, you have to look at the players in the team and how different it is from the old Vitality that won the CSGO major. Because when you look at this squad, a lot of what does win this team games is fragging. Like, it is that ZywOo's the best player in the server. That happens most of the time. Spinks, like, as you say, in most tournaments. Here's what's funny. He is one of the players who definitely does get to hide behind his overall rating from a year, from an event. Because as you say, he will mega destroy the bad teams and the medium ones. But I agree. There's been a lot of, like, big finals and semis where it's not even like he was, again, it wasn't like he was bad, but he just didn't carry. He wasn't the guy that you thought would, because I agree with you. On paper, when he is voted number 5 player of the year, and then you have ZywOo, who's like fucking the number 1 player of the year, bro, if I have number 1 and number 5, I'm supposed to just win everything. Like we talk about, that should be like an era right there. Like it's game over, right? So I think that's a valid point. And then I agree on the other ones, which is the things that they bring to the team, Mezzi and Flames, are quite obvious if you're an old school fan. Like, for example, Mezzi always was, even from when he was picked up in Cloud9, really good in clutches. And you saw early on, especially when he was just joining the team, you would see him win the clutch, and you're like, fuck, this is exactly what this team needs. Like, you know, you weren't going to get that from like Dupree or something like that at this point in his career. Like, yeah, this is awesome. If he just wins the odd clutch, you have the others carry, you don't need much more. But I agree, his fragging just isn't up to par in this team. It's why I say earlier, I get the Flames one sort of, because the difference with Flames is, obviously, you mainly think of him on the T side, because he's super streaky, he has really nice aim, and the joke is, when I've found out by talking to people, apparently his personality is just like his game is, mate. He's a guy that's always like joking, constantly. He's like the ADHD kid who's had too much Sunny D, you know. It's always like doing this and doing that and talking. Well, that's even how he plays. He just plays like fucking 100 miles an hour. But when it works, like you say, I mean, the best example ever, everyone remembers that old clip on OG when he was on Mirage. He ran into the B site and he just like headshot someone here, and then like on the window or something. And it looked like, what the fuck? Is this guy cheating or something? It looked like an aimbot, right? When he does that, you think you do the same thing you do with the other players. You think he's a better player than he is. But what you forget is, mate, Messi and Flames are hella inexperienced. What are we talking about? Like, these guys haven't won championships before. The only time they've won are these fucking first two are right out the gate with Vitality, where they were literally playing with the best player in the world. Like, I think people have misunderstood that, like, just like we were talking about Mouse earlier, we're not dissing any of their skills. We're sort of saying their mentality and their experience level has to catch up. And when it can get to that level, then in theory, like TSM, when they became strong, wouldn't they just win everything? Like, this team, that Mouse team could run the table if they got over their shit at this next major. That could be it, right? But the problem I have is, this is where when you kick people out of teams, or if you're a Vitality fan, I'll just say the obvious one is this. If you're anyone who thought like, yeah, actually, you know, maybe we don't need Magisk, like, haha, enjoy Falcons, idiot. You don't know Counter-Strike, mate. People like Magisk, like fucking, they're like forged in the fires of Mount Doom. They just fucking can handle that pressure, mate. In fact, they're the ones who themselves in the pressure moment are like, you know what, I'm going to break out the system a second and go for this kill here that I need to get, because otherwise the flow of the rounds going, we're just going to lose. Like, I think that's an underrated aspect, Maniac, because when you start to look at this team, bro, they've got Apex, who's mega experienced. ZywOo's pretty experienced because he's been at the top this many years now. Spinks is like, I mean, sort of halfway there. Flames is barely even registered on the meter. And then Messi had that one IM Rio run at the playoffs where they got there inexplicably and just lost immediately. That's about it. Like, it's actually, that's why I say people are really underestimating. When the team was ZywOo, Apex, Dupree, Magisk, I don't need to put Spinks in there, and then Zonic as my coach. Bro, the point there is the reason I can always have confidence is we should win eventually. We've got people that can do it, and I've already done it. We just have to get to the right headspace together. I think the challenge right now, and I'm going to flip this onto the guy we haven't mentioned, is fucking Extaz. Everyone wanted to tell me this guy's a genius, right? I will notice, and this always makes me a bit worried. It's a bit like Floppy. You notice how all the people who tell you he's brilliant are literally friends of his in real life or former teammates. It's like, bro, that's called a biased audience. Like, let me hear it from, like, you know, his opponents or, you know, someone who hated him and kicked him out. But tell me, that guy tell me he's brilliant, and then I'll be more interested. So similarly, when everyone told me Extaz is a genius, that was with the French lineups. That was when he was speaking in French to people culturally French. He even brought some of those players through on the team. This squad, by the way, there's only fucking 2 French people. And like we know, like in theory, like he's not the reason ZywOo's awesome. And Apex was there even when he wasn't there, was winning. So if you're Extaz, mate, it's time to start earning that fucking salary. Like, you're gonna have to actually figure out with players who haven't won and not on the biggest level how to get them to that level. That's really hard. Like, I don't put that as like an easy task. In theory, your job as a coach is just, you know, design what we're doing and set the practice. But there's something missing on this squad that is a bit alarming because it's been too many tournaments now, Maniac. It was one thing when it was just kind of Vitze. And even then you're like, well, the Ents just overperform. Or you go, well, the major, well, what could you do against that FaZe clan? It's like, mate, it's too many times now. You know what I mean?
I agree with you.
Now you know there's some like final element missing that would bring together Vitality. I don't know what it is, but I'm waiting to see it.
I agree with you. I mean, that depends on what you want from the Vitality, but I do think there's no way around the fact that both the Heroic Series in Katowice, the third map of FaZe game in Copenhagen, and now this grand final against Mouse, months apart, were all plagued by some degree of crumbling or the team falling apart. Like that has happened over months. And that's also after having won at the end of 2023. So it's not like you could just say, you know, they still don't know how to win. So that's off the back of victories. So I think there's already enough to worry for Vitality. And I am concerned that this is starting to get to them as well, because you know how you can basically learn to be helpless. Like there is such a thing as learned helplessness, where you start having this self-fulfilling prophecy that, oh shit's hitting the fan, we're gonna get all tense, and he out the rounds that we're losing. And then I worry that this is starting to happen to Vitality because of how quickly they turned into this chaotic mode against Mouse. I was actually surprised because I thought after the FaZe game and the Astralis game, that should have filled them with like the confidence that things are gonna be fine and all. I didn't see any of that. Now to bounce back on the Extaz point, the disclaimer here is that I know him personally, so I probably cannot be objective as much as I would like to be, because I do think he's a very clever guy. But I will say that not every team, and this is going to sound controversial, but it's not every team needs a clever coach to win.
Sure.
Different teams have different needs, and different coaches fit the different teams depending on what is it they need, what do they bring to the table. I don't know that Robban was an incredible mastermind of Counter-Strike to teach Kerrigan the ways of the callings, but he was filling something that they needed, and it was working perfectly. And when he left, you could feel that more than anything. And now they've warmed up to Neo, and it's working again. I don't know that Extaz has the profile that is currently needed to make this bunch actually win and overcome whatever problem they're having. And I'm mostly talking about the emotional and the psychological side of it, because there are obvious issues embedded in the Counter-Strike when we talk about levels and experience of Messi and Flames. Yeah, of course, that you can work on that. But I don't think this is the reason why a 0-3 happened in the grand final against Mouse. I think there are deeper issues that need to be discussed. I don't know if Extaz is the one to do that. I don't know if someone else would be in a bit better position to do that. Maybe someone with a stronger personality. I'm not exactly sure. I just think that the criticism, or at least the questioning, is now warranted.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.